Okay, so I wanted to talk about something that's really near and dear to my heart, which is touch. And this is something that me and a lot of my drummer friends talk about all the time is touch. And I think that touch, tempo, and dynamics are all really inextricably connected. I would go as far to say that they're same thing. And that even that like presence, like being in the moment, is almost the same thing as those things too. I'll explain why. So basically, I had a couple performances this week, and I played at a couple different places, and every place that I play sounds different. And this is an experience that a lot of drummers go through, and especially when you're starting to perform for the first time, is there's some rooms that you go and it's really loud, or it sounds really good, or you can play really loud, or it's really echoey, or it's really dry. Like for example, this week I had a rehearsal here in my studio, and I'm used to practicing here. I know what it sounds like, and I always have this experience where we have rehearsals at my studio, and I feel really great and just really connected and really creative and really in the moment when we're rehearsing. And I'm just like, wow, this is gonna be great. It's gonna be such a fun gig. And then we'll go and have the performance, and depending on the place, it's like I feel 60% as connected. And it's the same music. It's always music that, you know, I've been playing for a while. I know the music, that's not the problem. And of course it makes sense that I would feel more comfortable in a space that I'm used to, but I think the big difference is the sound and what it does to my touch. So for example, this space, it's like, it has kind of high ceilings, but it's also like dry enough that I can hear the articulation of my drums. It's like a good balance of like what I want out of a room, right? And then there's some venues in town that it's just like really washy, that the sound just explodes out. And so you have to play a very different way. And that's where touch comes in, because, you know, the way we move on the drums like determines the way that we're gonna sound, right? And so we build up different muscle memory based on our touch, on our tempo. I'll start to show you what I mean here. So basically, like, there's different levels of touch, right? Like I can play this drum from this height and get a really loud, harsh sound, or I can get a really soft sound, right? Like, so it's not the height, right? Because there's a couple different variables there, right? You'll say, like, if you're a physics nerd like me, you know, you're like, this is the same distance, but it's a different velocity. It's a different speed going from here to there, right? So there I'm like really pushing down, and the sound is like very harsh. It's like a hard touch, a very articulate touch. That's what I would call that, right? But the same goes down here. You know, I can make a very quiet sound down here, or I can make a harsher sound, right? And there's different ways that I do that with my body, but it all comes down to really the velocity, right? So this is huge. This is huge, because in some spaces, you're gonna feel like everything just kind of washes away and that you can't hear any of the articulation, like the attack of the note. You know, if I'm playing the ride cymbal, the ting, 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 rather than, right? So like, here's a lot of articulation. Versus if I was in a more articulate, dry place, I would want it to wash out more. And of course, you know, if you're slick, you can see that there's various techniques things I'm doing, but all with the goal of moving at a different rate. Now, earlier I said that touch, tempo, and dynamics are all inextricably linked. Let me show you what I mean, okay? So, for example, if I play at the same tempo, right, I'm gonna play, right? Now I'm gonna play that with a harder touch. Right? Notice I kept the height the same. So it's like the same height, which is usually what we use to control the dynamics, but it got louder. But not only louder, it's more articulate, right? Which is a different touch. Interesting. Okay. Now, let's say I'm going to keep the touch the same, but I'm going to keep the same dynamic. Touch and dynamic are the same. And then the thing that has to change is the tempo. So watch this. So like here's I'm going to do like a medium touch. So what's interesting about that is that like at the end I was playing this high. You know, this is like 4.5 inches, something like that. At the beginning I was playing this high. And they're almost the same volume, kinda. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? Because I kept the touch the same, which is kind of like how fast I strike down. I would call that velocity, right? Because speed is like, does that mean tempo, right? Right? So the velocity stayed the same, and because the rate at the stick was traveling like sped up, you know, I had to move closer and closer to the drum. So you see what I mean when I say that like tempo, time, and dynamics, they're inextricably linked. So let's do something else. Let's keep the stick height the same, and we're going to go faster and faster, so the time is going to change. But the touch, because of that, is going to necessarily have to change. So I'm going to start with a very harsh touch, okay? You'll see what I mean. You see what I'm getting at. I'm going to start really slow. Now watch this. With a very harsh touch, right? You see how as I got faster, because I wanted to keep about the same height, I probably went down a little bit, but as I wanted to keep that higher height, the touch like opened up. It went from a very sharp thing, because I can't really maintain that at a faster speed. I could, but it would be kind of messy, right? I'll try to maintain that touch at a faster speed. Right? You can see a lot of tension happens. It's very hard to maintain the tempo and everything like that. So then, again, like shifting the touch as I go. Right? So it's very interesting how those things are all connected. Now, why is this important, and what does it have to do with presence? First, I better describe what I mean by presence, okay? So when you're a jazz musician, or probably any kind of musician, there's like kind of like two different zones going on. There's like the practice brain, where you're like at home, you're working everything out, you got your mirror set up, you're like analyzing things, you're seeing how you move, you're doing all this touch, velocity thinking that I'm doing. And then there's the performance brain, right? Which is as little information as possible, be in the moment, accepting of what's happening, reacting to the room, to the players, to the instrument, and trying to be in a state that everything just flows out. Because if you're in a state of like a lot of analysis and stuff like that, it's not gonna work. There's gonna be choppiness and stuff like this. And if you perform regularly, you know what I mean by this. So that's what I mean by presence. It's like, how just in the moment am I? And I find that the more I can just be in the moment, the more I can let go of details, stuff like that, that's when I play the best stuff. And just basically let my muscle memory take over, let my ears take over, let my, intuition take over. And what does this have to do with touch? Okay, so when I'm here in my little rehearsal space, I'm reacting to the acoustics in here, right? And so I have a certain kind of touch. You know, there's like a certain sound that I want to get out of this cymbal, and I know this cymbal very well. And I know about how much velocity to put on the stick to get that sound, okay? And when I'm practicing the music that we're, whether we're rehearsing or I'm just shedding or I'm just working on fundamentals or whatever it is, I'm practicing with that in mind. I'm trying to maintain a good touch, everything like that, a sound that I like, that I want to have in my music. And the thing about that is that it gives you a certain kind of muscle memory right? Because that's really what we're doing when we're practicing is we're building up muscle memory so that, like, remember the practice brain? That's like building muscle memory in the right ways so that when we go to perform, that it just comes out naturally, that we don't have to think about muscle memory, that the ideas just flow out, right? So when you're practicing, I'm going for a certain kind of touch and I'm building up the muscle memory for that touch. And maybe a certain stick height. There's a muscle memory for that certain stick height. And then I go to a room that's really washy, and all of a sudden I have to play really a lot of velocity so that I can, have a harsher touch, right? So like, let's say that's the sound I'm going for, but I need more articulation in a washier venue, so I need a little bit more. But it's a washy venue, it's really loud in there, the drums really carry, so I can't play that loud. Okay, so now I'm down here. Right, so not only am I it goes from like this big open movement with like a loose touch to like down here with a pointy touch, right? Barely moving. And that's very different muscle memory, right? So what happens there, and this is why I always have that phenomenon of like going to a different room and being like, it feels like I'm on edge. I don't feel as in the moment, right? Is because the muscle memory is so different. And when that's the case, there's kind of like this power struggle that happens, right? Because on the one hand, you want to sweep in and like save your muscle memory. You want to like, grab the steering wheel and like control it, right? But it needs to be like a Jesus take the wheel kind of thing, right? Because at the end of the day, when you're in that performance context, you need to just go into intuition zone. Ideally, that's how everything's gonna flow more naturally. Everything sounds the smoothest, at least in my experience. So it's like this power struggle between, my muscle memory is not the same as what I was hearing, as what I was practicing at home. And that's why I say that touch, tempo, dynamics, presence end up being inextricably connected because there's this battle between your muscle memory and your intuition. Touch, tempo, time, that's all muscle memory. And then presence, that's intuition. But you can't disconnect them, right? And so, this is something like I have to be conscious of constantly because, when you're a musician, you play in different rooms all the time. Some rooms sound really good. Some rooms I go up there and I'm like, I play better here than I do anywhere, right? Some rooms are in the middle, right? I played in 2 different rooms back to back and I was like, oh man, I just felt so much more in the moment in that second room just because the sound was different. But the thing is, you're a musician and you can't make any excuses. You're there with the people playing the music and you just have to serve the music. And so what I've found to be most helpful for me is there's that power struggle. Do I grab the wheel? Do I try to control it physically? Or do I zoom out more? And I've found that time and time again, it's just zooming out more. It's just trusting it. It's trusting that it's going to come out naturally. And really making the important thing, which is the king of all of it, it's the sound you're hearing in your head. Because when I'm practicing here and I'm getting a certain touch, it's because I'm hearing a sound in my head. And when I go to that venue and things are sounding different because the acoustics are different, well, if I can just focus on the sound, like what I want to hear, then most of the time, my body will take care of the rest. That being said, it very quickly reveals certain things. Like if you're uncomfortable playing quiet and you're like, this sounds weird, but I'm not fixing it, right? Or if you play quiet, whenever you play quiet, you lose your articulation. That's kind of common. So like, where things just kind of like wash together and it loses the point or it slows down. Remember, time, touch, dynamics, all connected, right? So so there's those things that you realize that when you're in the moment, when you're just trying to get a sound and it doesn't come out, what does that become? That becomes what you practice, right? So like if you have a really important set of music, something that, like for example, I'm about to record something I want to just be able to deal on that no matter what, in any place. And I don't know what the studio is going to sound like that day or what my headphone mix is going to be like. And I want to be able to just shift into like intuition mode immediately. So what does that mean for the practice? It means that you practice it with a hard touch. It means that you practice it with a light touch. It means that you practice it super quiet. It means that you practice it super loud, right? And doing all the things, all the creative things that you want to do and being free and getting comfortable, doing all of those things. So like something I did once, this was when I was auditioning for grad school, and I really wanted to do well on the audition, you know? And there was like I remember that you could have like one prepared piece. So I knew for me, like I was pretty good at like big band and stuff like that, so I wanted to show that off. And so I chose something that had a lot of complexity to it and a lot of different hits and a lot of dynamic contrast, everything like this. And I practiced that thing upside down, inside out, backwards, trying to like chop one of my legs off so I had to limp. And what I did was I knew that I would be playing along to a track when I got to the audition, right? And so what I did was I didn't know what the sound system was going to be like when I got to the audition. But I knew that I had to show that I could just sit, be in the moment, own it, because that was going to be their one chance seeing me. And so I practiced it with my headphones blasting so loud that I couldn't hear myself playing, but still trying to maintain the touch that I wanted, right? So not playing louder, but just playing the same amount. I practiced like turning down my headphones so quiet that I could barely hear them and maintaining the same volume. So not playing really quiet, but just maintaining. And like I took my phone and I played it out of the phone speaker and played the whole song from memory. And just, there's like parts where I could just hear like one note in a measure, but I could play along to it. And I practiced playing it way too loud with that. I practiced playing really quiet. I practiced all these different things. Practiced it in different rooms. I practiced it over the speakers so that there was no way that I was going to be stumped. And when I got to that moment, I could literally just focus on the sound that I wanted to hear and just being in the moment. And then when I got to that audition, I was completely confident. Like, and guess what? The speaker was kind of jacked up. It was a situation like the speaker was kind of in front of me. So it was turned up loud and they could hear it well, but I couldn't. So that meant that I had to still play medium loud, but not so loud that I couldn't hear it. And I didn't drop a beat. Like I was so ready for it. And I think that just speaks volumes about like how we have to practice our touch when we're preparing for things with the ultimate goal of presence and just being in the moment. Have fun.